Aaron walks back to the tasting setup, I wanted to just introduce him. He's Aaron Walker, our esteemed winemaker since 2007. You guys may have joined us from our previous virtual tastings and vineyard tours with Aaron, or have seen him on our reoccurring virtual tastings on Instagram. More recently, Aaron led some of our club members at our San Diego tasting room through a delicious winemaker dinner. So we're excited to be able to do more events like that going forward. And then pretty soon, when they get back to the tasting setup, you guys will see Kenneth Uhas. Kenneth will be joining us today. He has been our consulting winemaker for about 13 years. He and Aaron have been working together to produce all of our wines. Kenneth and his wife live in Sonoma with their 2 daughters and have their own label called Auteur Wines, with a tasting room on the square in downtown Sonoma. Kenneth has been instrumental in guiding Aaron's winemaking in Pali's early years and continues to provide assistance and input on the winemaking. And also he works very closely with the growers and vineyards that we source in Sonoma and Northern California. So thank you for being with us today, Kenneth. And then for all of our participants, please feel free to ask questions through the chat feature down below, and we'll do our best to get through all of the questions when we have breaks in between the wine. So if you have any questions about the wines, the vineyards, the winemaking process, you can just leave them below. We'll be sure to get them. And then without further ado, Aaron, you guys are all set?
We're all good. Thank you, Rachel. So welcome everybody. We can't see you, but I know you're out there. And we're very excited to be able to come to you today from the Pali Estate Vineyard here in Santa Rita Hills. I've got our consulting winemaker with us today, Kenneth Uhas.
Hello, everyone.
I kind of sandbagged him on this one, just FYI. He comes to the winery once every couple months or so, and we work on the wines together. He usually stays for a couple days, and we go through a lot of the wines, put blends together, identify issues that may need to be addressed, and so he had planned to be here this week starting today. We booked this like a month ago, and I didn't catch that it was coinciding with this event that we're doing right now until about last week or so. And then I started telling the rest of our team, Rachel, Stacy, all the others, that Kenneth might be here that day, so I'm going to try and get him on the event that night, but I never told him. And, and he showed up at the winery today about noon, and we had a lot going on at the winery today. We had a couple people from out of town, some of our salespeople, one from all the way across the country was in town visiting, and so we had a small lunch organized, and Ken shows up at the winery at noon, and I call him because I was on my way back to the building, and he was there. He was just arriving, and I said, "Hey, I just want to give you a heads up. There's a lot of people there at the winery today. I don't want you to feel caught off guard, or we'll still get our work done, but here's what's going on." And then I still didn't tell him about this event tonight until I actually got to the winery and saw him face to face. And then I said, "Oh, by the way, you're going to be on one of our live events tonight." Sorry, I almost kicked the table over. But anyways, I was really, really excited that we were able to rope Kenneth in here, because as Rachel said, he's been such a big part of Pali and the winemaking specifically for many years, going back to 2008. And so he's been an integral part of Pali and the winemaking, and continues to be to this day. And so we're very fortunate to have him today, and I'm very, very happy to have all of you on with us. I understand we got a great turnout to this event today. So it's a perfect spring afternoon here in Santa Rita Hills at our vineyard. If you were on a few minutes before the event started, just now we were talking about the weather here and how it can be a bit unpredictable with the wind especially, and we're very fortunate tonight. It is just perfect, beautiful weather here. There's a little wind. If it starts to get so windy that it interferes with the microphone, please, Rachel or somebody, speak up, let us know. We can relocate if we have to. So we've got the 4 wines that were chosen for tonight that we're gonna go through. Kenneth's of course already gotten started on the first one here. So we've got Sunset, which is one of our many rosés that we produce these days. We've been producing Sunset for quite a few years, and it's
It was the first, right?
well, no, the first rosé was from Shea Vineyard, some Saugny.
But what was the name?
That was bottled under Pally, and it was the
straight
and
Pally.
Pinot,
Okay. Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah, that was just rosé of Pinot Noir, just bottled as Pally rosé of Pinot Noir. We didn't start making this rosé until we started the Tower 15 label around 2000, after 2010. Yeah. So if you all are not familiar, this wine, Sunset, was originally produced under Tower 15, and to make things a little more confusing, it's now actually labeled under our newest brand called Neighborhood Winery. But it Sunset, the wine, this dry style Rhone rosé, is something we've been producing for, I think 2012 might have been the first vintage for this wine. So we've been making this wine for quite a few years now, and it's been very popular, sells out every year. This is the 2020 version. It was just bottled about a month ago, and we're already, really, this is just making sure. Okay, we got the right vintage, 2020. So it's a blend of Grenache and Mourvedre with a little bit of Syrah added in. And that's it. Yeah. It's only about 5% Syrah. It's mostly Mourvedre and Grenache. And in this vintage, it was more heavy on the Grenache than Mourvedre. It's labeled as a Central Coast wine because it comes from multiple vineyards throughout the Central Coast. So we've got a vineyard in San Luis Obispo County and then a vineyard in Santa Barbara County where we're sourcing these grapes from. It's all barrel fermented and using stainless steel barrels and oak barrels, but all neutral oak. And we do a cool fermentation on these wines. So white wines and rosés, we ferment coolly in a cool fermentation. Can you explain what cool fermentation is?
Yeah, so cool fermentation is kind of around 50 to 55 degrees. And basically what it does is it slows down the fermentation process. If, like anything in nature, if it warms up, it moves faster. And so basically what that does is that that helps the wine to maintain all those lovely esters that we want to keep in the wine. If it ferments too fast, you volatilize a lot of that off. And I mean, the wine is still good, but we want to capture as much as we can.
The aromatics.
The aromatics,
right.
Yeah. And then what Aaron does is, we go through the primary fermentation, and then he does his best to arrest the malolactic fermentation so that we have just a lovely, vibrant, acidic wine to make sure we don't go through malolactic. And also to kind of keep the wine just nice and taut and super, super fresh, because it also keeps the acidity higher, the pH lower. So it keeps the wine from aging more than it needs to, because really the whole goal of rosé is to capture the kind of the essence of the season and the vintage as best as you can. And I think if you keep those acids high, you bottle early like Aaron does, you end up with something that you start enjoying nice and early in March, and if you're lucky, you've got a little left by August.
That's the challenge. We often run out before it's truly rosé season. We are, and because these are very popular wines in our tasting rooms as well. But we do sell this wine in very limited distribution, but it's not a large production wine. It's 200 to 300 cases a year that we produce at the most of this wine, and it's mostly sold directly through our tasting rooms and website. But yeah, it's the it is, like Ken is saying, it's a dry, crisp, high acid driven wine. It's definitely not a sweet, white Zinfandel or anything along those lines. Hopefully we've gotten away from that stigma by now, where people just assume any pink wine is sweet. It seems like
I think most of your members,
our members definitely understand that, I'm sure. Yeah.
But I mean, the kind of the Mourvedre Grenache rosés, even though they're dry, even though they're acidic, they are a little bit more full than, for instance, the Pinot Noir rosés that Pally produces. So those are even more light, even more vibrant. And so there's a similarity. There's a similar vein between the style, but I always pick up the difference. And I mean, when I taste this wine, it does bring me back to the south of France versus, I don't know what the
in your Speedo
is. In my Speedo, of course, red.
Rachel, just checking in, sound quality and everything okay?
Yeah, it's sounding great.
Good,
Oh,
good.
good.
Any questions on the rosé specifically or anything along the lines?
Nothing on the rosé. I think everyone is enjoying it.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yes. Actually, we do have a question. Someone wants to know how the rosé is made.
I just saw that pop up. Good question. And of course, there are multiple ways of producing a rosé. So if you're truly setting out to make a rosé from the start, you start off with picking the grapes at a specific ripeness level. And for rosé, that typically means you're picking before you would typically pick for red wine. So if Mourvedre, Grenache, if we're making red wine, we tend to pick those grapes at 25 Brix or higher, sometimes much higher. With rosé, we're aiming for like 21 to 22 Brix, just to give you an idea of the difference there. And so picking at lower Brix produces a lower alcohol wine with higher acidity. And that is what we want when we're making a rosé. We don't want something that's high in alcohol and low in acidity. If you have that, then you've got this hot, as we call flabby wine without the acidity. It's flabby.
We want to make sure you can safely open that second bottle.
Well said. So yes, this is designed to crush. Getting off the topic of the question, the grapes are harvested with the intent of making rosé, and then they're thrown into a press, which is what squeezes the grapes and separates the juice from the solids. And then and just before you press, I should back up one step. What we do at our winery is we foot stomp these grapes in the bins that they get picked into when they show up at the winery. We get our guys and gals that are working to start literally stomping on these grapes with their feet, and then we let those grapes sit in the juice that is now running out of the broken berries, and the skin contact with that juice is where the color is coming from. And so you allow those skins to soak with the juice for anywhere from an hour to 12 hours, depending on the grape and the style you're going for. And then you press the wine, or press the grapes rather, and then you ferment that juice. And now you've got pink juice that you can ferment. The other method of making rosé would be
Saignée. So what's often done with, and we certainly do at Pali as well, though I don't know where your Saignée goes.
It goes into PCH.
It does go into PCH. Okay.
Well, Pinots in PCH.
So with serious red wines, often what people do is when the fruit comes in and it's destemmed or not or whatever, but basically you end up with a must. In the first 24 hours or so, you bleed off, or Saignée, you remove juice from the wine. Or from the must, and that juice is rosé colored because it hasn't been soaking long enough till it's soaked up so much that the wine is actually red. And the point of doing it in the first 24 hours the point of doing it is basically to concentrate the wine more.
The red wine that you're producing.
The red wine that you're producing. Thank you. And so you're left with this lovely rosé juice that's from a Grand Cru type vineyard. People usually ferment that and make that as a rosé as well. Doesn't usually have quite the fruit focus of pressed grapes, but so it tends to be less fruit, can be a little bit more on the mineral side. Some people definitely have a preference one way or the other, but I definitely like them both, especially, and often the advantage with the Saignée is that it's coming from a great vineyard because it's being used to make a really nice wine, versus with the whole cluster, which I also love as well, is it's just super fresh and fruity characteristics.
And here I think he's being a little diplomatic about the quality of the Saignée, where I'm going to disagree a little bit and say that the Saignée, and this is me personally, my preference, I do not like the Saignée rosés, and typically it goes because they're higher Brix and you get these higher alcohol rosés that you create out of them. At least in our winemaking, because we do tend to pick for reds at fairly high Brix. I also, it seems to me when you press whole cluster, you get more fresh, just freshness in the rosés versus the Saignets that I've made. No, I'm not saying you can't make a very nice rosé out of Saignets.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I mean the
but-
Saignets, you end up having to make things like acid additions too, in order.
And water to knock the
Yeah.
alcohol down a little bit, and
So the whole
and
cluster,
it
you
becomes
can-
more work.
It does become a lot more work.
But anyway, so yeah, back to the question being that those are the two. Well, and then there's a third way to make rosé, and that would be a little alchemy with you take some white wine and blend in a little red wine, right? So, we've never made a rosé in that style. We have, and we always make rosé in both styles, but we've never done the third. Or no, I take that back. We have our big Vibe Rosé where we've played around a little bit with that under the neighborhood wines, but that was more just for fun. I think maybe we should segue into the next wine, which is kind of a rosé, but not really.
Sorry, I didn't open that one.
Oh yeah, here. So, Rachel, unless you see any other questions specific to the Sunset Rosé, we're going to move on to Dawn.
Perfect. Sounds great.
So, Dawn is also bottled under Neighborhood Wines, and this falls under a what I call less traditional winemaking. Although these types of wines were made hundreds, probably thousands of years ago. And so this is done in a natural style, and we can get into what that means. Natural wines, a natural style of winemaking. One clue that it's a natural wine is that hazy quality because it's unfiltered. Let's see if I can get it towards the glass there. Although you should all have this in front of you, I shouldn't have to show you. So it kind of looks like a rosé, but it's also more on the orange side as far as the color goes. And so this falls into what is known as an orange wine. It's actually a category, if you're not aware, it's a category that's has become more popular, especially in recent years. And basically an orange wine is any wine that's traditionally a white wine that gets fermented on its skins and produces usually an orange color, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a true orange color to be an orange wine. The point is that it's a skin contact fermentation. So just like the Sunset Rosé, the color is coming from the skins. And a lot of people, I know our members are more savvy with wines than the general public, but a lot of people don't realize that grapes, the grape juice itself runs clear and doesn't have color. And so to get color into any wine, red wine, rosé, orange, you need the skins in contact with the juice, like we were talking about with the making of Sunset. So this is made from primarily Pinot Grigio grapes, and Pinot Grigio obviously is most well known as being a white wine. Also goes by the name Pinot Gris. Same grape, just grown in two different areas or countries. The Pinot Grigio grape is very dark colored for a white wine grape. It actually has this kind of rusty color to it. And so when you ferment it on the skins, you end up with this rusty orangish colored wine. Now what we've done is we've gone and added about 25% of this wine is Chardonnay. And that Chardonnay actually comes from some vines just a couple hundred yards to my right here, here on the Pali Vineyard. But the bulk of the wine is Pinot Grigio grown at Spanish Springs Vineyard in San Luis Obispo County, very close to Edna Valley, up in that area, so about an hour north of here. So skin fermented Pinot Grigio, we destem the grapes, crush the grapes up so that the juices and the skins are all in contact. Let that ferment for about 10 to 12 days on the skins. Then we press it off. The fermentation's not done at that point. It's about 2/3 finished, but we press off the grapes or the must, the juice, the wine, whatever you want to call it at that point, and then let it finish fermenting in barrel. And then once it's done fermenting, we blend in some of the Chardonnay and bottle it as quickly as we can. We bottled this wine very quickly after harvest. It is a natural wine. So can you explain a little bit about natural wines?
Yeah. basically natural wines are don't touch it. Just don't touch it. So really, I mean, what Aaron has to do with natural wines is he has to shepherd the fruit through to bottle as cleanly and as stable as possible. And so he's using minimal to no sulfur or sulfites at all on the wine. He's not making any sort of additions to the wine, and that can be yeast, it can be acid, it can be fermentation additives like vitamins or nutrients to help with the fermentation. He's got nothing to cheat with. It's just got to be kind of escorted through, and that's kind of in a nutshell. There's no filtration, or even the possibility of filtration. I mean, basically, once he commits one of those fouls, then the wine is no longer considered to be a natural wine, and so it's believed to be the purest version of what the vineyard can show you. And sometimes with that, it's this is not the case, but sometimes with some natural wines that comes with flaws. But when I say flaws, for instance, some of the best cheeses and most complex cheeses in the world are considered riddled with flaws. So flaws can actually bring lovely characteristics to a wine. So in a nutshell, don't touch it. Don't touch it, and make sure that it's protected from things like oxygen. It's really a labor of love. There's a lot of paying attention, even more so than with regular wines. And Aaron's actually gotten pretty good at it.
I've had great consultation.
Aaron, are we going to be adding some more natural wines to our lineup?
Yes, I'm sure we will be. It's something we're still learning. I'm still learning. We as a winery, we start out very small. We've produced these natural wines in very small quantities. This orange wine was originally a wine I started producing about 4 or 5 years ago, with the intent of only serving it in the tasting rooms on tap in our keg program. It was not intended to be a wine that was bottled when we first made it the first couple of years, but sure enough, as I said, these have become more and more sought after types of wines. People are asking for these, looking for these orange wines. And so when we as a company, as a winery, decided to launch this newer label, Neighborhood Wines, this was a natural wine to include in that lineup. And so this wine has really taken off, or is starting to. And then we've got things like Harvest Moon and Blood Moon, which are also under that same category of natural wines and bottled under the Neighborhood Winery. Harvest Moon is a combination of Pinot and Chard that's produced like a white wine, similar to Vinho Verde from Portugal. We've got the Blood Moon, which we're doing carbonic fermentation or maceration with some red grapes, and we can get into that on another call or event. Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Harvest Moon is amazing. And then we more recently, much like the orange wine with Dawn, we now have a Pinot and Chard that are naturally produced from this very vineyard. And those have been served in our tasting rooms for the last, starting about 1.5 years ago. We try and have the Pinot, the natural Pinot and the natural Chard on tap at every tasting room location all the time. Occasionally there's hiccups there, but now, again, that those wines, there's a high demand for those types of wines. And so we have started bottling those wines as well. So we do offer the natural Pinot and natural Chardonnay bottled as Pali Wine Company wines, and in very limited quantities, less than 200 cases each. And we just bottled our first natural rosé, as rosé of Pinot Noir, as a Pali Wine Company wine. And so we are starting to dabble with distributing those wines, so selling those wines through our wholesale channels, so that you may see some of those natural wines more on the Pally side, but you might see some of those wines start to show up on wine lists at, you know, some of the better restaurants or at some of your better local wine shops that look for those small, more boutique produced wines. So yeah, natural wines is definitely a growing part of our portfolio, but that does not mean we're changing our winemaking styles on our traditional wines, and it also does not mean that the traditional and wines of Pally are not natural. That's the other thing that kind of gets me when we start talking about natural wines. It's like, well, what does that mean about the rest of your wines? Are those unnatural wines? You know, obviously they're not. We've always been very careful about the grapes we use. You know, everything when we're talking about natural wines, everything starts in the vineyard. So you got to have grape farming without heavy use of or any use of chemicals and pesticides and herbicides. And so that's always been a part of our, you know, our philosophy.
Can I hop in on that?
Yeah, go.
But my description of natural wines is I feel the truest sense of natural wines, and the reality is that natural wines is not a legal term, so it could be used with almost anything. And what I'm describing is what we do at Pally is the truest sense of it. And you know, it's like on some of the wines that we make under Tower or whatever, you know, we might use commercial yeast, which we think doesn't make it a natural wine anymore. It is natural. It's a natural product.
It's a natural yeast, yeah.
But it's not. It doesn't have a
grapes
yeast
are
that's
natural.
from the vineyard. You know, and so we're trying to give you the what we believe is the truest sense of a natural wine.
Right. And then, yeah, that's a very good point. It's an unregulated term. Anybody can call their wine a natural wine, and there's no government regulation that controls that term. Unlike, you know, organic as a term, you know, you cannot just throw organic on your label without the certification and everything that comes with it. Natural wines is such a new category that in France, they just in the last year actually established some guidelines of what it means to call your wine a natural wine. And so, but that's not the case here in the United States. And, you know, I've heard some wineries say, you know, you can still call it unfiltered if you don't do the final filtration, which is like a very sterile filtration, meaning you can still filter the wine, just what we call a rough filter where it cleans it up. But, you know, to us, to Kenneth's point, that is not a natural wine. A natural wine, you don't filter in any form. You don't fine it with anything. But, you know, it's not a regulated term. And so anybody can use that term and create their own meaning for it. And we have done, but we're taking the very conservative meaning of it to mean that it's exactly what Kenneth described. It's grapes that were grown and harvested, and the native yeast did the work of the fermentation. We added nothing to it. We let it age in barrels that are all neutral, so there's no oaky flavor added to it. We don't fine the wine. We don't filter the wine. We don't add sulfites to the wine. With a very small exception, we do most of the time we'll add a very small amount of SO2 right before bottling. And it's a very minimal amount that is almost gone and dissipated out of the wine by the time it gets, you know, by the time the cork's removed. It's 20 parts per million or less of SO2 that's added, which even if you're not familiar, just sounds like a very small amount, 20 parts per million. So, and that's just to protect the wine and keep it safe, just to get it in through the hoses and into the bottles. But it's so minimal that if you have issues with sulfites, it wouldn't affect you. You could safely drink these wines.
So Aaron and Kenneth, before we move on to the next wine, would you mind just describing the difference between carbonics and natural wines?
Well, carbonic doesn't.
It's not a difference, but yeah.
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that doesn't define natural. So just the concept, you can make a massively commercial wine.
They're independent of each other.
They are independent.
Or
of
can
one another.
be.
Yeah. But carbonic is basically what you're doing with carbonic is the clusters are whole. They're not destemmed. They're placed or crushed. They're put into a tank, and then you're pumping CO2.
A sealed tank.
The sealed tank. Thank you. Pumping CO2 into that environment. Hence the carbonic. And so basically, the berry, it actually ferments. The fermentation happens within the berry itself. So I think we all think about, you know, sort of a tank of wine fermenting as one unit. Well, with carbonic, you have million fermentations happening in a tank. They're all happening, at least for some period, within that berry in itself. And it's amazing the difference. If you were to destem or crush, the exact same fruit and taste them side by side, which is like a nice little tasting room thing if you haven't already done it, then you would taste an unbelievable difference just in that fermentation concept. Often people with natural wines, they believe that that's kind of the next step as far as like, okay, well then you're not even removing, the grape from the stem, or you're not crushing, you're really just kind of letting it all happen. But that's when you sort of get into this great territory of, well, then maybe we shouldn't plant in rows because that's not natural, or you can take it, sky's the limit. But we like carbonic a lot, and Aaron's been working with some carbonic fermentations, and we just we take the whole natural thing like literally, and we try to be as honest with one another as we can, because it's a little bit of a gray territory. So we're trying to be as black and white as possible.
Yeah, and to add on to that, the carbonic wines that we are producing are also naturally made wines. So we do produce our carbonic wines. And actually, I forgot, with this wine with Don, we did some Pinot Grigio carbonic, and that went into this wine. So we did the destemmed, fermented on the skins for 10 or 12 days. I forget the exact number. And then we did a portion of it in this carbonic fashion, which also produces a very lightly extracted rosé style wine. And then we blended those together with the Chardonnay to create what is now Dawn. So, but traditionally you see carbonic winemaking done more with red wine grapes to produce a wine that's very, that you bottle young and drink young, and you serve it chilled, and it's very fresh. And the best example is of course Beaujolais Nouveaux, from the Beaujolais region of France, where they use Gamay, and they often do this carbonic fermentation. And so you're getting very little extraction, like we were talking about. Color comes from the skins. When the grapes are just sitting there in a closed up tank, you're not beating them up and extracting a lot of anything out of the skins, color included. So,
and part of that, as well as I was talking about, not losing esters or aromatics in a tank. Well, when you ferment in that berry, that's about the smallest tank you can create. So you really hold on to those aromatics.
how are we doing time wise?
Great. I think we should probably move on to the next one. Yeah, the Pinot.
Perfect. Any fun questions?
We just had a final question on the Dawn. What role does the Chardonnay play in the Dawn?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Why'd you do that?
Because somebody told me to. So initially, in full disclosure, we the neighborhood wines, part of the concept was that every wine we produced under neighborhood wines was a blend, not a single variety. And so that was part of the reasoning for it. But it also turned out, that the Chardonnay added a great component to the wine, and in structure and acidity, and it really livens up the wine. I think, without the Chardonnay, it's a little monotone, what kind of one-dimensional. With the Chardonnay, it really just lifts it up.
Fills it in, and the thing is, that's from
Minerality.
It's from this property,
Right? Yeah, right. As we said.
So it's like the fact is if Aaron's allowed to do that, he's probably going to do it, because the Chardonnay from this estate is pretty amazing. Yeah.
So moving on to some beautiful Pinot Noir from one of our longtime favorite vineyards here in the Santa Rita Hills. We've got Rancho Lavinia. This is a vineyard we started working with in 2010. And we still continue to buy grapes from this vineyard to this day. So it's, like I said, one of our long-term relationships and vineyard sources. As we sit here in the Santa Rita Hills, we are in the northwest corner of the rectangular shaped Santa Rita Hills. Rancho Lavinia sits, actually, I'll see if you can see this, but I don't know if you can see those hills directly across from me, but if you were to go directly over those hills, you would end up on the south side of those hills there, and that's where the Santa Ynez River flows right past Fiddlesticks Vineyard, Sea Smoke, Sanford, and then Rancho Lavinia, which is just to the west of Sanford. So here in Santa Rita Hills, we have basically two corridors, Highway 246 being the northern corridor, which travels east and west, and then Santa Rosa Road, which also travels east-west, which is to the south of us here, and that's where Sanford Winery, Fiddlesticks, Sea Smoke, well, not Sea Smoke technically, but anyways, Rancho Lavinia sits on Santa Rosa Road, so it's on the western side of the Santa Rita Hills, closer to the ocean, which makes a difference in terms of ripening. This vineyard sits high up on a hillside with a north-facing slope, so it's way up. It's not down low in the river valley. It's actually high up on the hillside there. Pretty sandy soils, very very exposed, meaning it gets it's not protected because it sits high up on this river valley on this shelf. It gets a lot of wind, which really influences the wine. I think the tannins. This wine is always. I think you'd probably. I hope you agree. We've always considered this to be one of our more grippier, masculine style Pinot Noirs because of the style, just the wine that we produce from this vineyard. But that has to do with the location and all the wind and the thickening of the grapes, the skins. Which,
I mean, you get with that cooler weather as you described. I mean, that's definitely beneficial because you get a little bit more of that hang time with the season without it over maturing. It's like hang time's awesome if it's not hot out. If it's hot out, things get a little lazy. Yeah, it gets for us it gets a little limited. So it allows us that, and then also with the wind for sure, you end up with the thick skins. The tannins can be a little bit on the grippy side. I don't know if it's the exact. Let's call it rustic maybe. But they, they're there. They're not super lush, long tannins that you might get from something like Fiddlesticks. Like they're just barely abrasive, like kind of like a gin and tonic would be. Like, hey, there I am. And then you still have all the intensity, etc. with that site. So I've loved working with this vineyard. I mean, it's always been awesome to come in and taste with Aaron and they're like, oh wow, it is showing very similar to the way it did last year. Like it's really consistent, and it's just, and I'm assuming that's one of the main reasons it stays with Pally. Because we just like its consistency as well.
It's been very consistent. Our members and customers have obviously, people vote with their checkbooks, and this is a wine that always sells out. We always, it doesn't have the name recognition like Fiddlesticks Vineyard and some of the other vineyards we work with, but it's got the quality and there's something unique to it, and it's very pleasing, and it's definitely a crowd favorite. It's one that sells very
forward too. Like
it is.
It's just, we were just working on the 20 today, and it's just it's, I mean, I can tell this
2020 vintage.
Yeah, the 2020, and it just, the fruit just kind of leaps out of the glass. Like it just is, it's here, it's fresh fruit, but it's exuberant.
Yeah, I'm getting on this one. I'm getting fresh raspberries, maybe some cranberries even, but it says bright red fruits for sure. Yeah. And this is a 2018, which has been in the bottle for about a year now. We barrel age these wines for about a year and a half, 16 to 18 months. Age it with, on average, 50%. It's always, not always, but it's almost always right around 50% new French oak barrels that we're aging in. So half the barrels are brand new, the other half are older, previously used barrels. And that oak adds to the complexity and the flavors of the wine, of course. But we also give it another 6 months after we bottle it minimum before we release it, just so it's time to settle down and become even more elegant and enjoyable. Go ahead. Were you going to say something there?
Yeah, we one of our members is drinking the 2019 Riviera up against the 2018 Rancho Lavinia tonight, and wanted to know what you thought, like the noticeable differences between those two wines might be.
I mean, I think that the Riviera tends to be, it's Sonoma Coast, so it tends to be a little bit more flat, black fruit focused, and I think there's a little bit of kind of that earth tone.
Absolutely mushroomy.
Yeah,
Forest
in the wine.
floor. Yeah.
It's kind of background music, but it's there. And then I think that sometimes the Riviera, and I'm trying to think of the 19 versus the 18. The 19 Riviera, it can almost seem like it has a little bit more richness to it. It's like it has a kind of a chunkiness about it versus, correct me if you disagree, but I find that the Rancho La Viña is it's kind of more red fruit, lively. And that's what I see. And then of course the spice, yeah.
Baking spices, Christmas, what I call Christmas spices, often in the Rancho La Viña, just Santa Rita now.
And the soils with the Riviera site are, they're kind of more loam clay versus the sandy soils that Aaron was talking about. So very, very different sites.
When I first heard the question, my first instinct was, that's not even a fair comparison. So I'm glad you jumped in on that one. So like, it's apples to oranges, but that's a great question. Just real quick, that's a great question for Kenneth, because I think we mentioned it at the beginning. Rachel did for sure. Kenneth lives about 10 minutes from the Pali Sonoma Vineyard, which is entirely where the 2019 Riviera comes from. We used everything that grows on that 22 acres in Sonoma is grown specifically for Riviera, and we planted that vineyard same time we planted this one here in 2012. Kenneth has been instrumental and involved with that vineyard in Sonoma since day one. He still, to this day, works very closely with our grower there, a guy named Ned Hill. Kenneth decides on when to pick. He coordinates those picking decisions. He even oversees the winemaking of this wine at a facility up in his area.
So what he's saying is the Riviera is better.
No. Better. I mean, yeah, it's as good as you can. I guess. But no, I was trying to give you some kudos there, but then you got to go and do that. But anyway, no, this this vineyard Riviera is almost in his backyard, and without Kenneth, we'd be hurting because he is our boots on the ground up there and works very closely with our growers up in that area.
Yeah, and it's a great site. It's kind of like the Pali second estate, really. I definitely consider this to be the main estate for Pali.
It is, yeah.
But the Sonoma property is great. I mean, it does deliver just this richness in the wine. But yeah, I mean, we get into the cellar in Lompoc, and it's so different from everything else we have.
If you're a longtime Pali fan, our roots started with making Pinot Noir up and down the coast. I mean, going back to the 05, the original days, and for many years, we purchased grapes from vineyards in Oregon, all throughout Sonoma County, and then locally here in Santa Barbara. And so we've been, making these Pinot Noirs from these different regions for many, many years. And you really, there's no, we don't look to compare the Sonoma wines with the Santa Rita Hills wines. It's more of a contrast. It's like, here's what Pinot Noir can do here, and here's what it tastes like when you grow it here. And it's so cool to see these consistent, year after year, you get these same flavor profiles. And just like, he was describing the Riviera, that's exactly how I describe it. It's, bigger, richer fruit. It's got more earthy, kind of mushroomy flavors, blah, blah, blah. But that's the beauty of Pinot Noir, is that it's not the same location to location, site to site. It varies so much in its flavors and profiles. I think we beat that one down a little bit, that question anyways. Rachel, did you have other questions, or should we go on, or how are we doing?
We are doing great. I think we're right on time. I think we could probably move on to the final wine.
Okay, great. Anything else you want to say about Rancho La Viña? No, good, awesome. I will say it's another great vineyard site that I'm blessed to work with. It's got amazing history going back to the California Spanish land grant days. The owner of this vineyard, his family has had this same property, the Rancho La Viña property, in his family since those days in the mid 1800s, and they use that property for farming all kinds of products, not just grapes. Grapes are actually one of the newest additions to that property, but they grow walnuts. They're very well known for their walnuts and organic tomatoes and all kinds of other produce. So anyways, Rancho La Viña is definitely a vineyard that we feel a close connection with, and is one we're very proud to work with for so many years. Jetty is a red Rhone blend. Do you want to explain a red Rhone blend? Just
Yes.
basics.
So red Rhone blend, that is a traditional blend of grapes from the Rhone, predominantly from the Rhone. Syrah being, you have to tell me the portions, I forgot, but
Grenache Syrah heavy.
yeah, Grenache, but Syrah being certainly a portion of that, Grenache, Mourvedre. They are varieties that do well in warm temperatures. Not overly warm, but certainly warmer than Pinot Noir. And I actually was doing a tasting with Tim a few months ago.
Tim Purr, the owner of
on
Pally.
thank you. With Zoom, and hadn't had, I think it was the vintage previous to this. I was like, oh my god, like this totally tastes like an awesome Côte du Rhône or Chateauneuf du Pape. Like it's if I'd been served the wine blind, it'd be like, wow, that definitely seems sort of old world to me. But old world in a sense where it's, you know, in that part of the world, those wines tend to be red fruit oriented, kind of a little bit on the jammy side, but have lovely complexities because you're working with, you know, several different varieties in the blend. And it's always fun making this with Aaron because, you know, we come into the cellar and, you know, kind of pick out a couple favorite barrels that we might do as single vineyards or whatever for you guys. And then we, you know, kind of see, you know, how the rest of the blend sort of falls together. And every time we put it together, like, oh yeah, like that's tasty. That is tasty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this Jetty for us, the blend, the proportions of the grapes we use in the blend changes a little bit year to year. Definitely the proportions. What stays pretty consistent, definitely in more recent years, is that we use Syrah and Grenache as the basis of the wine, and you know, that makes up usually about 75% of the blend is Syrah and Grenache, and then we'll add in things like Mourvedre, Cinsault, and Carignan, which are what are blended into this particular vintage. The Mourvedre is something that we haven't used every year, and there's reasons for that. I've actually had trouble sourcing those grapes a couple years in a row. We weren't able to even get any Mourvedre grapes for various reasons, but we've always used the main, you know, as a base, Syrah and Grenache, which are the two most well-known grapes from the Rhone Valley by far. Cinsault and Carignan, obviously much less known, and they are very typically used as blending grapes, not standalone grapes. Definitely in the Rhone Valley, they're only blending grapes, unless you know otherwise. But I don't think I've seen Cinsault or Carignan bottled in the Rhone. But I'm sure there's probably some doing it. But
California.
yeah, okay, good. That's what
you see like Counoise, you know.
And we've used Counoise. We've made Counoise. I wasn't as crazy about that one, but you know, Cinsault, Carignan, we've been doing for 5 years now or something. I found a source for these grapes here locally in Santa Barbara at Camp 4 Vineyard, and you know, I learned about those, you know, whatever. If you start diving into Rhone wines and red Rhones, then you discover there's like 22 red varieties that are legally grown in the Rhone Valley, and we only know about maybe 5 or 6 of those. You know, I mean, there's so many. But it makes for a lot of fun. Putting these wines together, Kenneth was saying, these are fun wines to put together. They're less serious than Pinot Noirs. Pinot Noirs, you know, you need like classical music playing and serve, you know, butlers and tuxedos, you know, that piano or, you know, what. But with Rhone wines, you want like rock and roll playing in the background, and you want
a hanger stick.
There you go. Yeah, Philly cheesesteak or something. You know, but these tend to be a little more fun wines to drink too. They're a little more rustic. The blends, you know, you have so many options when it comes to blending. So you can really tailor.
Have lovely complexity to them. I mean, like it's not maybe as finite, but there are a lot of flavor profiles you get from the wine, and they just bring just a lot of pleasure.
Yeah, and I don't mean to dumb down these. Talk down about this wine either, because I have a huge, you know, appreciation and I love Syrah especially, but Rhone wines in general. And so I was very excited to start working with these types of grapes when we started launching the Tower 15 brand.
Yeah.
Back in 2010 or so. And so
I do tend to think of this and as almost a CDP or a Chateauneuf du Pape. And if you guys know the area at all, I mean, the Chateauneuf du Papes are, the Southern Rhone, those are the most well known.
Mhm.
And I just find them to be pleasurable, just
Right.
simply pleasurable.
And as you touched on the sun, I mean, they speak of being grown in a warm climate. They just feel like you're tasting ripe fruit and just this, you could just taste that it was grown in this area just coated in sunlight. And very rocky soils, often sandy rocky soils, kind of harsh growing conditions, very old gnarly vines. It's just it's very fun wines to make and hopefully to drink too. I know I enjoy drinking currently. Yeah, cheers. So real quick, there's plenty of time for questions and stuff, but just give you a quick panorama here so you can see our view. Not bad.
The rooster stopped crying.
Oh, that's right. I did get quiet.
Alrighty, you guys. So for all of our members joining, if you guys have any last questions for Aaron and Kenneth before we sign off, we just completed the 4th wine in the lineup. Aaron, we're getting some comments about how the Jetty has definitely improved in their opinion over the last couple of years, and that it's a lot of people's favorites.
Oh, great. Thank you. I appreciate all comments, but especially the good ones.
We're being asked if there's any growth yet in the vineyards.
There is. I will show you right behind me. Turn the camera around for everybody to see where. But so I'm walking up into one of our Pinot Noir blocks, and this is clone 667, and there you can see bud break has occurred. And so if you look right here, this is a bud that is just starting to pop out. And then this is one that's been out for a couple days probably. And so we're seeing maybe 30%, 25, 30% of the vineyard looks like this. The rest of it is still just behind, not quite budding out, but very, very close.
Beautiful. Aaron, what is the best way for members to keep their bottles of wine fresh over the next few days that they've opened for this tasting?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Well, for sure, the pink and orange wine in the refrigerator, and then the red wines just close them back up. Red wines tend.
Isn't the French too?
Okay, well, yeah, so the consulting winemaker says put them in the fridge, so the reds too. So I've heard mixed opinions on whether or not to refrigerate red wines, but if you're going to drink them within 2 days, I think the red wines are safe either way, even if you don't refrigerate.
Perfect.
But the best thing is to just drink them.
Great. And then also, you guys, for all of our attendees, Aaron has been doing weekly virtual tastings on Instagram, and they've been uploaded onto YouTube as well. So those will be uploaded usually at the end of the week, Thursday or Friday. So we're trying to continue our wine education for you guys on all different platforms. So he'll likely be doing one later this week, perhaps, or next week.
Yes.
But you can see them on our Instagram. We have them saved live on there as well. And I think that is it. Are there any other questions before we finish up? Oh yeah, people are really loving the Harvest Moon and the wines from the tastings. Perfect. All right, Kenneth and Aaron, well, thank you so much for joining everyone tonight and walking us through those wines. And then for all of our members joining, thank you guys so much for participating and for your questions. And we're gonna keep doing these virtual events. So, and hopefully some in-person ones very soon.
That's right. Yeah. We'll get back to doing the vineyard tours hopefully soon.
Nice
Yeah.
to meet you guys.
Thank you, Kenneth.
Yeah,
thank
for
you
being
guys.
with us today. Thank you all for joining us. It was fun. We'll do it again soon.
All right, have a great evening, everyone.
Alley for the people.